So this is one more interesting video on project management, and especially this topic on functional and non-functional requirements is absolutely essential if you are a project or a product manager. Now, what exactly do you mean by functional and non-functional requirements? So at a very high level, a functional or a non-functional requirement is a primary way that a customer communicates their needs to the team, right? So more specifically, a functional requirement is what really defines the scope of the work. Now, if there is no particular functional requirement document, then definitely it would lead to quality issues or maybe a lot of rework, which could lead to a loss of time. And essentially, these could drive up the costs as well, right? Often in a lot of scenarios, functional requirement is often tied with non-functional requirements, which we will see in the next slide what exactly we mean by non-functional requirements. What happens is, if there are too many non-functional requirements, it might often drive up the cost. Now, to lower your cost, there definitely needs to be some kind of scope cutting in place, right? So imagine that the functional or non-functional requirement tries to help a project or a product manager to help optimize cost and quality at the same time. What functional requirement does is it kind of defines a basic system behavior, which might consist of things like if-then behaviors, or maybe some calculations that you are going through in your particular project, or you are developing a product and it has a lot of calculations derived columns that you are generating. It would have a lot of inputs or data factors that you are taking into consideration, maybe a lot of business processes, and there could be also different product features which focus on different requirements. Now, these requirements come under the purview of functional requirement. Functional requirement can be broadly of the following four types. The first one is business requirement, where you need to have a final objective, like what are you exactly trying to develop? Is it a virtual environment or a sandbox environment that you are trying to build for testing and debugging your applications in the development environment? There could be different levels of authorizations or approvals that might be needed. So a good amount of documentation around those things is needed in a functional requirement. Your functional requirement could also be having administrative stuff. So for example, the routine things that you generally do on a particular tool or platform that you are developing. Things like reporting out certain KPIs like sales, basket metrics or transactions, a lot of those things. Your functional requirement could also have things like the user requirements. So what are really the type of functionalities that the user can do? So you have built this wonderful tool and it has, let's say, a lot of buttons out there. So what exactly happens when the user press on one particular button? It could be a account activation button, it could be a login or a logout button. Your buttons would have different functionalities. So a list down of all those functionalities at each of these buttons or the object levels comes under the user requirements in a functional requirement document. Also, one other important part is the system requirements, which is a specification of the different kind of softwares or hardwares that is really required for this particular project or product that you have developed. Now, on the other hand, what exactly is a non-functional requirement? A non-functional requirement is, more around how exactly the system works in the backend. It doesn't really affect the basic functionality of the system. These are more around the properties, and it focuses on the user experience. So for example, your user clicks on a login button, right? And it probably takes 2 minutes for him to get into the environment. So that's an user experience. So this kind of time delays, or the time it takes for a particular operation to happen in the backend, comes under the non-functional requirement, right? So there are for example, a lot of things that could come under non-functional requirements. For example, the usability. It could be what exactly is the appearance of the user interface, how the user uses it, the color, the buttons, and a lot of other features. It could also be about the reliability or the availability, like what could be the uptime requirements for weekly batch jobs that you probably execute in the backend. What exactly is the scalability? If you're looking at maybe 100 data points and your the product that you have developed might take 5 minutes to run. Now, if your data is scaled up to maybe 1 million records, in that case, does your product that you have built take 5 minutes or does it take 15 minutes? So that also talks about the scalability and how good your underlying architecture of the product is. Is it a fast or a slow performing product? So often what happens is if you see sites like Amazon or Flipkart, the e-commerce giants, what happens is during the holiday season, there's a lot of volume in terms of the orders that they generally get, right? So they have a very efficient load balancer kind of a system which distributes the load, the peak volume of demand in such an efficient way that you would not really face issues with respect to delay in the page loading attribute, right? So at times, because of the massive volume, there would be a delay, but mostly if you imagine systems which are really scalable and have a very good performance, those would not really have a long gestation period. Even if you're talking about support, maybe if there are any external plugins or resources, anything else that is required for the application or product that you have built to run, that should come under your non-functional requirement. It could also be dealing with the security part of it. It could be the physical security checkpoints or cyber security checkpoints of the product or the application. Non-functional requirements also, in generally could also talk about things like how portable it is, that whatever you have built, how portable that is, how flexible that is. It should also come up with exhaustive documentation of all the features and all the attributes that is there, how fault tolerant the system is, what is the response time, all of those things. One important aspect to note about non-functional requirements is that this isn't mandatory like the functional requirements that we described. And a common difference between functional and non-functional requirements is that while functional requirement represents more about the product features, non-functional requirement talks about the product properties. And this is a little harder to capture when compared to functional requirements. So that's about non-functional requirements. Now, an important question is how really to gather these kind of requirements. So definitely we need to brainstorm with different stakeholders associated with the product development process at various levels in the organization. Now, one important thing to keep in mind is that not all stakeholders are always users. For example, a functional requirement would be when the user enters his information, he receives a welcome email. Whereas a non-functional requirement would be, discussing things like when sending a welcome email, the server must respond within 10 minutes of registration. So that's more around a non-functional requirement. Now, there are certain best practices when dealing with functional and non-functional requirements, because these are really documents that are dealt with or are used by stakeholders who are not often very technical. What I mean here is that it's very important to make your requirement documents agnostic to the audience in such a way so that a non-technical person doesn't find it very difficult to comprehend what you have written. On the other hand, it's not so vague and so simple that a technical person or even a non-technical person for that matter doesn't really understand what exactly or how precise your documentation is. So a few important pointers to keep in mind in terms of best practices while writing these documents. One is use an active voice instead of a passive voice. Your language should be natural and very easy to follow. There shouldn't be any vagueness, so the document should be clear, crisp, and to the point. We must always use definitive words like must or should. And there's this interesting video that I had uploaded quite some time back on, I think, data sufficiency or logical reasoning, where I elaborated on this particular aspect. What's the use of definitive words versus non-definitive words, and what is it that you should use? So that's an important thing. Other than that, I think things like if you're talking about a metric that the load time is fast, so things need to be quantified. So when you say fast, you have to specify how fast, and you have to understand the fact that if you're saying that terms like this might increase cost or this might have a diluted impact, it's always better whenever possible to quantify the metrics that you define, right? So if you have a lot of properties or a lot of product properties, it doesn't really mean that it's something good that has come out of it. It might be simply that you have incurred a lot of cost and the impact is a little diluted than it could have been with much less features. So the main point here is to build a product or an application which has the right set and the right blend of features and properties that solves a business purpose or some objective that you are trying to solve. And a very good way to understand how good your tool is or platform or application is to benchmark with your peers with respect to the peers in the industry. It will give you a good sense and a good idea about what are the different other market practices that the other peers are following, and try understanding the pain points from the stakeholders or the users so that you can tie those back as feedback while developing the product and refine your project objectives based on that. And the specification development, which consists of these two core pillars, one is the functional and the non-functional requirement, is a very evolving and an iterative process. So we need to always make sure that the requirements get developed and they are feasible at every point of time, and you do not commit something which is non-feasible or conflicting with any other property that has already been mentioned somewhere in the document. And a good way to go ahead with functional or non-functional requirements is to mostly try and use visuals and avoid technical jargons, because there might be people in your audience who are very non-technical and do not like to, like me, go through a lot of text. So that's it, guys, for this particular video, and I hope this was really useful. So the next time you try to develop your application or a product, or even simply if you're starting out with some kind of a project that your client wants you to work on, so a good start would be to understand how exactly the scope works. And to understand the scoping of the project, what's really important is a good understanding of functional and non-functional requirements. So hope this was useful, and we would have more other interesting videos, especially on project management. So stay tuned, watch out this space for more interesting videos. If you are a new visitor, I would definitely recommend you to subscribe to this channel to stay updated and notified about any of our new and interesting videos. So what are you waiting for? Just press on that subscribe button and we will have another session very soon. Thank you.